into the fight against ISIL. President coming in with the Secretary of State, the Vice President.
Good afternoon.
And former Secretary of Defense.
Today, as part of an international coalition of some 60 nations, including Arab countries, our men and women in uniform continue to fight against ISIL in Iraq and in Syria. More than 2,000 coalition airstrikes have pounded these terrorists. We're disrupting their command and control and supply lines, making it harder for them to move. We're destroying their fighting positions, their tanks, their vehicles, their barracks, their training camps, and the oil and gas facilities and infrastructure that fund their operations. We're taking out their commanders, their fighters, and their leaders.
When shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the age?
It's barbaric murders of so many people.
Now these disciples had been led to believe that the world was coming to an end.
Nothing but misery and death and destruction. It's barbaric murders of so many people. Nothing but misery and death and destruction. There's only one option. With our allies and partners, we are going to degrade and ultimately destroy this terrorist group. And ISIL is going to lose. ISIL is going to lose. And ISIL is going to lose.
U.S. President Barack Obama is asking Congress to formally authorize war against the ISIL terrorists. Obama sent Congress a proposed resolution asking lawmakers to legitimize U.S. airstrikes against the ISIL that was launched nearly 6 months ago. He also seeks to authorize military force. In a letter to lawmakers accompanying the request, Obama wanted to limit authorization to 3 years with no restriction where U.S. forces could pursue the threat. The proposal would allow the use of special forces and advisors for defensive purposes. Special forces can also take action against the leadership of the ISIL. Ground forces can also be used in rescue operations involving a U.S. or coalition personnel. Obama said that ISIL poses a threat to the U.S. homeland if left unchecked. Let's see what James Petras thinks. He's a professor at Binghamton University who joins us from New York. James Petras, this threat by the ISIL was known to the U.S. They came out 6 months ago with this U.S.-led coalition, but what Obama is asking for sounds like there's no limits to where, geographically speaking, forces can go, U.S. forces. Wouldn't that be somewhat not in accordance with some of the regional countries, for example, Iran?
I think it's a very ominous move because it coincides with Washington's threats to arm the junta in Kiev. I think the latest policies of Obama's military strategy is directed toward expanding U.S. influence and power and overthrowing the Syrian government. I think ISIL is a pretext to directly involve the U.S. in Syria and to actively pursue a two-front policy of one attacking ISIL but strategically aiming at overthrowing Bashar Assad and imposing a U.S. puppet regime. I think it's extremely dangerous. It's extremely interventionist, and it coincides with Israeli policy, which essentially is opposed to the alliance between Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah, Lebanon. So I think this has very ominous consequences for the region. I think it will further destabilize the political configurations. But more important, I think it'll tip the balance in Lebanon toward the extreme right-wing Christians who are engaged in an alliance with Israel. I think that the Obama administration is essentially looking to impose its influence in Syria.
So if we were to take a look at what Obama said that he wasn't going to do because that's what the American people didn't want, and that was wage a war against Syria, you figured this may have been part of a game plan?
Well, I think
6 months into it and now he's going to go for it?
I think the pretext is ISIL, but the real target is the independent government of Syria. I think the Israelis are very much involved. Netanyahu's visit to the United States is part and parcel of this united strategy, despite whatever differences the U.S. may have tactically with Israel regarding the peace negotiations with Iran. I think the Israelis and the U.S. Have a common goal of first overthrowing the Syrian government and then encircling Lebanon and then moving forward toward attacking Iran. So I think a lot is at stake in the U.S. Direct military intervention. This is not defensive. This is not a operation strictly limited to ISIL. This is an offensive operation. It's U.S. boots on the ground in Syria, and there's no way of distinguishing between a defensive and an offensive war. This is a myth. This is a fiction. Once the U.S. troops are there, they're going to be shooting in two directions, one toward ISIL and one toward the Syrian government. Let's not forget the U.S. has been supplying the so-called Syrian opposition with arms, logistical support, training since the beginning of this so-called civil war.